We are discussing functionalism as a theory of international relations. This was given by David Mitrani. This functional theory of integration is part of liberal institutionalism. That is, the role that the institutions play in creating peace. Earlier we discussed Kantian variables, 3 Kantian variables. 1 democracy, 2 trade, and 3 IGOs. Functionalism is about the role of IGOs in creating peace. Okay. But this Kantian theory was discovered much later, in recent years. David Mitrani was not trying to apply Kant's theory. He was trying to find out independently how nations can be at peace. He was working on that after World War I happened. Mitrani proposed this theory first in a conference held at Yale University in 1932. That was before Second World War. And finally published a pamphlet titled A Working Peace System in 1943. Okay. So Mitrani was proposing it in terms of how to prevent war, or you can say how to contain nationalism, how to contain nationalism, which was responsible for World War I. Mitrani thought there should be certain technical functional agencies in nations. There should be certain technical functional agencies which are doing certain functions related to all the nations. All the nations. So one kind of interdependence develops because of these functional agencies. He said first functional agencies can be technical and economic, and later as functional agencies expand, they expand because if you start one agency to do one function, then it will also create some other problems, and so in trying to solve those problems, some other agencies will be created. So he calls it a spillover. And task expansion. More tasks will be done and it will spill over to other agencies, and finally more agencies will be created, because of which interdependence will develop. So creation of worldwide functional agencies to promote interdependence across nations is what is functionalism. Is what is functionalism. What were the agencies that were there before Mitrani proposed this functionalism? These were the agencies. International Telecommunication Union, International Telecommunication, 1865. Universal Postal Union, ILO. These were the agencies that were performing, and he thought they would do better than the government, and due to spillover means increased cooperation in one area leads to cooperation in other areas. So more agencies, and so interdependent relations will be created. So he called it working peace system between the members, between the nations. Working peace system. Okay. And he was proposing it in the context of so many ideas on how to contain nationalism. For example, one idea he very clearly opposed is the idea of federation. He said the European federalists, those who are proposing that there should be a federation of the nations, have been so fascinated by a readily convenient formula that they have neither asked how it works, where it exists, nor whether its origins bear any relation to the problem of uniting a group of states in the present social ambience. So he is rejecting the idea of creating a federation. So he's saying instead of federation, try IGOs in certain technical areas, and then interdependence will develop. And these ideas have influenced founding of many systems post 1945. So you can say functionalism is an influential idea. Okay. After this, there is something called neo-functionalism came. Neo-functionalism is developed by Ernst Haas. It's a German Jew migrated to US. Neo-functionalism is application of functionalism to a regional level. He got the idea of regional level because at that time European integration was going on. Okay. Haas also is committed to how to contain the evils of nationalism. He says his entire work is informed by that. The one theme that sort of underlies everything I have done is the conditions under which the state as we understand it disappears, disintegrates, weakens, changes. But why the interest in the state? Because I grew up under a system of an extraordinarily powerful state that victimized me. He was a Jew, talking about Hitler's Germany. So my idea was, How in the future do we get rid of states of that kind? He said it in an interview. So, neo-functionalism is about regional level, but Haas disagrees that you need to make a distinction between technical and political. Technical is not separate from the political. And he says integration is a process whereby political actors are persuaded to shift their loyalties towards a new center whose institutions possess or demand jurisdiction over the pre-existing national states. So basically, nation is losing certain jurisdiction and agencies is gaining certain jurisdiction. Okay. So this is how functionalism, that is creation of the institutions to bring peace, is proposed. How effective are these ideas? It is found to be, they can be very, very effective. European Union is one very clear example of functionalism. Let's look at what happened. After World War II, Europe has seen so much of destruction. And then US planned this Marshall Plan in 1948. And Organization of European Economic Cooperation, created in 1948 out of 12 nations. This is to implement Marshall Plan. So World War II happened and USA took leadership. Marshall Plan started and European development started. Okay. So European Union is in the context of aftermath of World War II, US leadership. Why US is interested in this? Due to Cold War. Okay, so much destruction, Cold War, and US help. So it is in this context European nations were willing to coordinate their activities. So they started with European Coal and Steel Community in 1951. Why this is important? Steel is important for so much of manufacturing, production of many things that are needed for war. But only 6 members. This is one important idea of integrating. For example, they create an institution, but they don't force it on others. So nations join gradually, slowly, willingly. So they created structures of easier entry, easy, flexible. Okay. And that is how they were very successful in creating a strong institution now, is what is called EU. EU came in 1992 from European Economic Community in 1957 and then European Community and finally EU in 1992. How did this come about? Certain agencies and then And then they were trying to create free trade, free movements of goods and services, and also capital and people. To make this free movement possible, they have to have common environmental standards, common health standards, and even currency coordination. So one institution after another, they started creating. European Commission was created in 1965. European Commission was an executive wing. European Parliament is legislative wing. European Court of Justice is judiciary. So legislature, executive, judiciary, like separation of powers. And then there is one more which is called European Council, which is made up of ministers of member states. Okay. And finally, they created one currency, euro, in 1999. First joined only by 11 nations. And in the same year, they created European Central Bank. So this is a very successful way of containing nationalism. Of course, there is no common army. And then see how they wanted to handle the evils produced by nationalism internally. For example, there is European Court of Human Rights, which is not a EU institution. In this, citizens can appeal against their own governments. So, very high level, I would say these institutions represent higher values by which mankind should live by. And nationalism contained or down, hugely down. So the nations who bitterly fought among themselves could now create one currency union. And now it has 27 countries. Many countries joined after the fall of Berlin Wall in 1989 and subsequent end of Cold War. And currently, they constitute 500 million population and 1/3 of world's GDP. This even after UK voted to leave in 2016 and finally left. But Ireland is part of EU now. Okay. So I would say EU represents a higher and better part of mankind itself. Better part of mankind. EU shows what man is capable of. Capable of very innovative political organizations, arrangements, and capable of implementing higher values. And is EU the only example of functionalism? No. Look at this. International Atomic Agency, IAEA. This was a low-key technical assistance. It started with low-key technical assistance to nations. And finally, later came NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty. Non-Proliferation Treaty is implemented through IAEA. International Atomic Energy Agency. And implementation of NPT can call for sanctions. For example, Iran is under sanctions. So, started with something technical, but became instrumental in implementing international law, which included application of sanctions. So this is how functional agencies can be powerful and contribute to global governance. Okay. Recently, something like Paris Agreement is also an example of functionalism. Okay. So IGOs as a way of creating peace is one very important way of creating peace. But does it mean that we can create IGOs anywhere and then get the peace? It is not possible. For example, can we create IGOs among China, Pakistan, and India and develop common structures? It is not easy. So that is why some people would say either IGOs are bringing peace or the IGOs are coming when there is already peace. I think maybe both are mutually influencing. IGOs impact peace and peace brings more IGOs. So somewhere we should break the cycle of violence and conflict, and we should begin cooperation. And that cooperation can take us to better institutions. Thank you.